Deputy Chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Slovakia. Thank you, gentlemen, also for coming, joining us for this important discussion. The discussion, which will be led and moderated by Dr. Niklas Novaki, the senior researcher of our Martin Center. So once again, thank you very much. I am really pleased. This is a forgotten feeling to look at people and to have a feeling that we are really lively interconnected. Thank you very much for this uplifting feeling. Enjoy the debate. Thank you.
So everyone, welcome on my behalf as well to this first in-person Martin Center event since the beginning of the pandemic. My name is Dr. Niklas Novaki and I will be moderating today's discussion. And I'm happy to see so many of you here today, and I'm happy that many of you are also joining us via the virtual sphere. Even though I wish it would be slightly under better circumstances and not under the shadow of Russia's unprovoked war against Ukraine. But with me today, we have three excellent speakers to discuss the topics that our President Mykolas Zurinda just outlined. And I very much look forward to hearing what all of you have to say on this topic. So before we kick off the event, just a couple of quick words on the house rules. Each of you will have approximately 7 minutes to give your opening remarks. Afterwards, we will have an open discussion on the topic and a Q&A with the audience. And for the audience, just to know that this event is live streamed. And so please feel free to tweet. Please feel free to post anything that you might want on other social media platforms as well. So that's completely okay. But without further ado, let's kick off the discussion. And I think I would first like to give the floor to the former Prime Minister of Lithuania, Andrius Kubilius, also a member from the Member of Parliament from the EPP group. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Niklas, and thanks a lot, Mykolas. And definitely, it's pleasure really to have personal meeting, and the first one, and especially in Martin Center, which always has such an ability to have very stimulating intellectually, discussion. So thanks a lot. Now, here I'm feeling a little bit worried in between of, two military guys to speak, for me to speak about military issues. I confess that my knowledge is very limited, immediately. So I will speak a little bit more, maybe broadly, and I will try to understand where military issues can fit into more general, security questions, which we perhaps all of us were facing. And of course, this war, Putin war, what we can call, I call it crazy war, whatever, we can use criminal war and so on. Even, for me, for us, for our team in European Parliament, from Lithuania, from the Baltic states, at least for me, it was totally unexpected. Despite all American, intelligence, and statements that there is possibilities that Putin will decide for invasion, I was not believing till the last moment that it can be, it can happen. Because for me, it looks like very crazy, simply crazy decision, which, is really, first of all, damaging Putin himself, and well, I hope that really Ukrainians will win together with our, support and assistance, and in the end, perhaps we shall have different Russia. But for time being, we have what we have, and just few comments, what lessons we can take from this, from this Putin war. I'm taking first, very simple geopolitical lesson. Authoritarian regimes in our region, if they are staying long in power, they tend to become aggressors. Not just authoritarian regime which can be anti-democratic and so on inside of the country, but then they move outside of the country. because of different reasons. We can discuss why Putin decided to make this war, but authoritarian regime is becoming aggressive. The same is with Lukashenko. I don't know what consequences for that we can, conclusions we can make from that when we're looking into some other authoritarian regimes, for example, China. But for us, here is very simple, simple conclusion. So if somebody thinks that, okay, the war will be over, maybe, with some kind of peace agreement, Putin will maybe swallow what he lost, in some or another way, and then, he will be able to stay in power, and we shall try to find how, to come back to business as usual, what Europeans we like very much, to do. So that's not a solution. Because second, again, conclusion which we need to make very simply, perhaps this is, again, nothing new, but till now, on political level, I saw that still, for some member states, it was difficult to agree with that language. Now, perhaps everybody will agree that authoritarian Russia with Putin, in the leadership, is the biggest threat to security of all European continent, if not for the whole world. We need to see in a very clear, colors that. Now, so that's why, to dream about business as usual would mean, always to have the same threat, next door, to Europe, and that is what I think is really, it really demands from us some kind of clear thinking, strategic thinking. And that's why, besides military means, we need to see also what is, in general, what could be. Maybe for time being it looks like a, fantasy, but I see the only way how really security on the European continent can be established, stable and for a long period of time. There is only one answer. It's democracy in Russia. We need to think how, to deter, to defend ourselves against an authoritarian Russia, but solution for stability and security is the only one. Without that, always European continent will stay, unsecure. Now, I will not elaborate. We have, some kind of our, forums with Martin Center, also with Russian, opposition liberal people who left, Russia, who are now in somewhere here in Europe. We are discussing quite a lot about, how some things of that, can happen. The war can open the doors, but again, it will depend very much, the doors for, new developments in Russia. It will depend very much also on our policies, on strategic policies of Europe, especially, for example, really strengthening Ukraine, not only, helping Ukraine to survive, but making Ukraine, strong and with integration and so on, and in such a way, inspiring Russian people, to follow Ukrainian example. But this is a different topic. I hope that at some time we shall be able also here, to discuss with Martin Center. What, additional conclusions, what I can make, out from the war, from the first, and I am, here I am, going into some military, field where I am very much afraid to say something, some kind of nonsense.
Don't be so modest.
First of all, what I see that, despite all Putin, declarations how strong in the military area Russia is, in conventional, war, and they have shown that they are not so strong as they were pretending to be. I don't know about technologies, but really political will to fight among them is really on a low level. And Ukrainians showed very, also very clear evidence. For me as a civilian, they shown very simple things that Ukraine, among democratic European countries, for time being, has the strongest military capabilities. Maybe without, proper, armament and so on, but their political will to fight really is amazing. And that is why sometimes I'm saying that it's not very clear for me, should Ukrainians ask membership in NATO and EU, or should NATO and EU ask, Ukraine to join? Because, with their, strengths on, military side and political will to defend, European values, that will be benefit for those organizations, not only for Ukraine. Now, last maybe thing where I am coming down to a question which was put about, military capabilities of European Union, either, European Legion or European Army, whatever. I think we need to see perhaps two issues here. For what purpose we are trying to create some kind of, and those topics also are, resurfacing in European Parliament. For what purposes we want to have this European Legion? Because if we consider that this would be some kind of instrument to defend ourselves against, Russian military forces, so I don't know what is the benefit from 5,000 or whatever, this is military question. How much they could help if Russians have, if they collected something like 150,000 against Ukraine, so what we should achieve with 5,000 on our side. Territorial defense, this is, of course, absolutely a priority, but this is on national level. We can maybe push, some kind of philosophy to nations, to European countries, that they need to develop that. But this is not, it does not sound for me like European Legion, if we are talking about, territorial defense in each member state. For some kind of, military activities when we need to stabilize somewhere in Africa or somewhere else, I understand the logic, But what the war is showing, and where I see, what EU needs to resolve, besides, Legion, whatever, how we should call. I would say, it's EU needs to understand how important it is for EU itself to resolve some geopolitical issues and to learn lessons about geopolitical leadership. And when somebody, for example, is talking about strategic autonomy of Europe, of EU, I'm always saying a very simple thing. And this war exactly, gives me additional, argument. Strategic autonomy of EU should start from EU strategic responsibility for its neighborhood. Very clearly, geopolitical responsibility. Because I think that we can, I would, be in a very, I would bring a lot of arguments saying that EU inability to enlarge and to integrate neighboring countries like Ukraine, like Georgia, Moldova, and maybe Western Balkans, was one of the reasons why Putin decided to move with his military invasion. So we need to learn very, 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 very clearly. In order to, bring and to expand, area of democracy, which as I said, before at the very beginning, this is a security guarantee. We need to be much more strategically, able to take the leadership and to push forward, enlargement, whatever, policies towards our neighborhood. To bring Ukraine, to bring, other countries closer to us, and not to allow Putin to think that he can do something. Second point, we need to learn how to implement in such a way, what Putin started to do with the war. Still, we are not so good in implementing maximum sanctions from the very beginning. I'm not, again, I confess that I am not a military guy. But when I am asking myself how to stop the war, so I see two options. One is Ukrainians are defeating Russian, militaries, whatever, in as soon as possible. We need to deliver maybe different, than weapons, but they are defeating them, and then perhaps the war will stop. But I do not see that we are delivering, Ukrainians proper weapons, and that is why I'm saying that from my point of view, if things will not change, so we shall see, long, trench war in Ukraine. I mean, Russians will not be able to move forward. Ukrainians will not be able to kick, Russians out from Ukraine. So that is one option. Second option is really to introduce such sanctions that Russian economy would collapse immediately, and that is embargo on oil and gas. And still, Europeans, we are not able to agree There are plenty of evidence, plenty of experts who are saying that it will not hit European economy as somebody is, speaking. Some leaders are speaking. We had, interesting discussions. I came now, from EPP group. The numbers which you can look, European Central Bank is saying that even if we would introduce maximum sanctions from that point of view, immediate embargo on oil and gas, our economy growth will diminish only by 1.5%. Russian economy, again, as some international experts are saying, Russian economy in that case, would collapse by minus 30 or 40%. This is what does it mean, Each day we are paying now 700 million or 800 million, into Putin pocket because we are buying still, oil and gas. And during this year, we shall pay if that will continue. If we shall not stop, we need to understand what we are, doing. During this year, we shall pay somewhere around of 200 billion per year. Per day, we are paying 800 million. Per year, we shall pay 200 billion, which would be 3 times more than we were paying in 2020. And it will mean that we shall pay 3 military budgets of Russia. We shall cover. In 2020, we were covering 1 budget. Now we shall cover 3 budgets. If we shall not stop, doing what we are doing now. And it's very clear that, those sanctions which were introduced from the very beginning, harsh sanctions, like, like freezing European Central Bank reserves, they are now starting to dilute because we are paying such a big amount of money that, Russians are able then to go forward. So inability from our side to introduce maximum sanctions from the very beginning does not allow, us to see that in such a way we could stop also, the war as quickly as we would like to see. So that's a problem. And then the last point is why I see also the problems on our political side or geopolitical side. Of course, I would call it in a very simple way, what to do with German dependency on gas and oil. That is a problem for time being for the whole Europe, because that is why we are not able to introduce those sanctions, because some countries are reluctant. Of course, there will be a need of some political decisions, clear decisions, and some countries still now are avoiding because their dependency on Russian gas and oil is really quite a big one. So this is, I stop here. I see really what, besides military things, what we could do in order both to improve our security and also, to stop the war now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kubilius, for that excellent kind of geopolitical overview of the topic and for kind of outlining some of the kind of challenges that Europe is currently facing, and it's also in its relationship with Russia. I already have kind of several questions, but I think before we jump into the questions, I would like to hand over the floor to first to Dr. Jamie Shea for his comments, and we'll then take it from there. Jamie, the floor is yours.
Nicholas, thanks very much indeed. Great to be here in such distinguished company. I'm a research associate at the Martin Centre, which means that in addition to getting many excellent lunches, I occasionally have to sort of show up and deliver. But on this type of topic, it's a pleasure, Nicholas, as much as it's obviously a duty.
I'll make it up for you, Jamie.
So thank you for the invitation. Well, look, we've had a situation where for some years already, both NATO, it's in my DNA, I was there for 38 years, and the European Union have been looking more at Russia, looking more at the neighbourhood as the focal point for their strategy, rather than, if you like, the deep blue sea or the world beyond, and obviously looking at becoming more serious geopolitical actors. So even before the invasion of Ukraine, you had NATO, of course, stepping up with its reinforcements in Poland, in the 3 Baltic states, the constitution of a NATO response force, the constitution of 4 multinational battalions in the region. You've also, of course, had the European Union with its common threat assessment, taking a more realistic view of the world, looking at a higher level of ambition. I mean, this idea of a 5,000 force for rapid entry came very much out of Afghanistan and the desire of the EU to have a capacity to stay on at Kabul airport last August, even after the Americans have left as well. So we haven't, if you like, been hit totally cold in European defence by this shock of Russia now invading Ukraine. So what I think the Ukraine crisis has done has very usefully in both organisations taking this up to the next level. Now, the first conclusion that I bring is that clearly NATO is likely to be the most immediate beneficiary of this. Why? Well, obviously collective defence is now paramount. The wolf is at the door. We still don't know, and we certainly can't exclude that the Ukrainian conflict could spill over onto NATO territory, either deliberately or accidentally. When Russian cruise missiles land 20 kilometers from the Polish border at the Yavoriv site, you know just how vulnerable NATO territory is, at least to a Russian incursion. The other thing, of course, is Putin will be mad with us for some time to come, because he obviously sees the incredible amount of assistance that's pouring into Ukraine by Europeans as well as the United States and others, sustaining the Ukrainian army. So if he doesn't invade us in a conventional sense, the hybrid warfare scenarios of cyber attacks, sabotage, disinformation, influence campaigns will continue. Although the Ukrainian crisis has been a very good wake-up call, and Andreas referred to that, in terms of reducing our dependencies on Russia, not just in oil and gas, but in multiple other ways. In London, we've finally started to clean up the London Stock Exchange after many years and start putting restraints on Russian dirty money in the British economy. But these are cheap and easy operations for Russia to mount. It has a long experience. So we're going to have this on the home front, even if we don't face a conventional attack. But NATO will be the immediate beneficiary, because where are most of the European forces going at the moment? They're going into reinforcing NATO. France has now agreed to take over command of the new multinational battalion in Romania. The Czechs are sending 650 soldiers to Slovakia, where a second multinational battalion will be constituted. There will be one in Bulgaria and one in Hungary. I welcome this, because if you look at the first 4 multinational battalions that NATO established, one was led by the UK. I say this with bitterness and regret, no longer an EU country. Second one, Canada in Latvia. The Americans are leading in Poland. And so there was only one EU country, Germany, which was leading in Lithuania. And this is against a background where only about 20% of the totality of NATO defence budgets is contributed by EU countries. So we were in a kind of first stage of responding to Russia's annexation of Crimea back in 2014, of basically sort of subcontracting EU defence to non-EU member states, albeit allies of long duration. I think this second phase, where you're seeing the Black Sea region getting the support, we're probably going to have EU countries in the lead, NATO countries here, with substantially European forces. So I think this is already a very good strategic rebalancing in terms of the heavy responsibility for collective defence between non-EU countries and the majority in NATO, at least 21 EU countries. We're seeing Denmark sending 800 troops to the Baltics. We're seeing Spain send ships and aircraft as well. In fact, 10 allies so far have reinforced. So a lot of, if you like, the slack in the system that the EU might have been looking at to do things in Africa or in the broader field, I say this simply as a constatation, will be going for NATO collective defence. European budgets are going up. Before the invasion of Ukraine, NATO was expecting that only about half of its members would meet the 2% spending of GDP by 2024. Now we see Italy agreeing to meet that benchmark. Some countries like Poland, they're talking about 3%, Lithuania 2.5%, for instance. Belgium has added 1 billion euros to its defence budget. And of course, Germany, come back to this in a moment, has made this spectacular move to devote 100 billion euros to the modernisation of the Bundeswehr and to reach the 2% target. We've seen Finland and Sweden participating increasingly in NATO exercises. They're up in Norway at the moment as part of the cold response exercise. Now, one also immediate consequence of this is that Europeans are likely to buy more American military equipment. The Germans have recently said that they will purchase 35 Joint Strike Fighter aircraft. Poland is buying 250 Abrams tanks. The Germans are also looking at Israel to buy perhaps one of the Israeli missile defense systems, if the Israelis will agree to sell them as well. Why buy American? Because when you have a threat at your doorstep, you need immediate military capability. And if many other European countries, 9 already, 10 now, with Germany, are operating the F-35, the economies of scale, in terms of training, spare parts, maintenance and so on, are enormous. So one initial challenge, of course, I think coming out of this, with defence budgets going up, with more money available, is first of all, how do we spend the money wisely? We've had a whole legacy in Europe of wasting vast sums on defective military equipment, years late and overpriced in terms of being delivered. How do we get the best bang for the euro? And the second, I think, big issue, particularly as the EU looks at its defence technology industrial base, is how do we sort of balance, buying off the shelf quickly because we need equipment, we need capability, we're threatened, and how do we sort of invest at least some of this money in long-term programs, for example, the Franco-German Future Combat Aircraft System or the armoured vehicle that they were looking at, space capabilities, the things that Thierry Breton is looking at in the European Commission. So we have a European capability for the future. The other thing is that this strategic conjecture means that there are 4 big questions, but also 4 big opportunities that we need to look at, which I want to mention briefly. The first is Germany, inevitably. The most spectacular thing that happened in Europe has been this turnaround in Germany, which so far seems to have been swallowed by public opinion and by the political elite. Ukraine has been a real turning point in that respect. But obviously, it's no good building up the Bundeswehr now. Germany will become, by the way, the 3rd biggest military spender in the world, if it spends the money. The 3rd biggest in the world. Germany, once again, will become the dominant military power on the continent in a way that it has not been since 1945. So there are 2 big questions here. Number one is how do we get Germany to adopt the strategic culture of a more geopolitical actor willing and able to use its military capabilities? And what role can the EU or NATO play complementary to the efforts that obviously the German government will make itself to change that culture? You can't do it overnight. You can buy an F-35 pretty quickly, but you can't do that because, of course, if public psychology, and I understand from opinion polling, Roland, you know this better than I, but it's about 50-50 in Germany at the moment in terms of people who welcome the shift away from a more pacifist approach. What do we do without being counterproductive, to shift that momentum along? The second thing is that I know, and I was in the Czech Republic on Monday, that inevitably in Europe there will be people who will massively welcome this big effort by Germany. It's necessary. The Bundeswehr clearly was out of date. A lot of the equipment not working. Awful readiness levels. At one stage I saw that the Germans had every single one of their ships in dry dock and not a single one at sea because of maintenance issues 2 years ago. But clearly, seeing the Bundeswehr come back as the biggest army on the continent, that will obviously, make people wonder to, what that means for the long-term future. So this is the big opportunity for the European Union. How do you Europeanize German defense in an EU framework? I mean, inevitably, people will look at Germany to once again provide the conventional defence backbone of NATO. That's pretty clear, particularly as NATO has to go from battalions to brigades, from brigades to divisions stationed in Eastern Europe. Can we have joint Polish-German divisions, joint Benelux-German divisions, joint Italian-German divisions? Germany will be the framework nation, but how do we Europeanize this concept? I think this is really the key debate that we need to have. Second issue, my country, the UK. The Ukraine has, if you like, brought Britain back into Europe. Global Britain, nobody talks about that in London any longer. British ministers are once again spending more time in Brussels, in Warsaw, in Kiev, than they are in Australia or New Zealand or Japan. The UK has reopened a military base at Senilager in Germany. It's put 1,000 troops into Poland. It's doubled the size of its commitment in Estonia. And this week, UK decided to permanently station a marine strike force in Norway 1 year, Sweden the next year, Finland the following year. And the UK has massively invested in the Northern Group. Now, the UK has about 25% of defence spending in Europe at the moment. It's a great part of the capability. So the Ukraine crisis is an opportunity to re-engage the UK in European defence. How do we do it? Because the UK clearly will prefer other frameworks, the V4, if that survives, the Northern Group, for example, the Lancaster House cooperation with France that's been ongoing for certain years already, the Dutch-UK amphibious force. Can the EU be flexible with formats in a way that makes it politically easy for London to re-engage permanently on the defence of the continent? I think there is a significant challenge here that needs to be looked at. Thirdly, what will be the role of the EU at a time when, as I said, the capabilities are going essentially into NATO? I would argue that there are important roles for the EU. Number one, very briefly, collective defence is not the same everywhere for NATO now. Yes, in the Baltic states, where Russia is close by, it's hardcore military capability. But if you go to the Balkans, where you have a number of EU, NATO member states, Russia is not there in a military threatening way. It's there with cyber influence campaigns and other things. So I would argue that where you have, if you like, soft collective defence in certain regions of Europe, rather than hard collective defence, clearly the EU, with its resilience capabilities, can play the larger role. And I've mentioned already the cyber attacks as well. The third thing that I think the EU can do, and this has been referred to, is with all of this extra money out there for research and technology, we have PESCO already, we have the European Defence Fund, how can we put this extra money into the current EU programmes that ensures that we actually develop the cutting-edge capabilities that we're going to have in the future? And how can the EU have a goal of providing 50% EU of NATO capabilities by the end of the decade? The other thing, finally, which I think the EU can contribute, is that we are going to have two EUs. One EU defence will be a kind of adjunct to NATO, inevitably, as long as Russia is the threat to our territory that it is. But the other part is the expeditionary EU. And this has to be led by France, which has already established a European intervention initiative in which Norway and the UK also participate. 10 countries are in that. So I think we have to have a sort of a German land conventional defence aspect and then a French-led expeditionary aspect for dealing with the Malis, the Central African Republics, the Burkina Fasos, everything that the EU is going to have to do in the southern neighbourhood. Finally, NATO-EU relationship. I think the most important thing today now, as the two organisations come closer together, on resilience, on dealing with the neighbourhood, on capability building, is to have a discussion on what is the articulation between 42.7 of the Lisbon Treaty, in other words, the sort of EU collective solidarity clause, because Olaf Scholz sort of suggested when he was meeting the Swedish Prime Minister that that could somehow be used for the EU to defend Sweden, not a NATO member, and how far does that go vis-à-vis the Article 5 clause of NATO, and therefore how the two organisations can either take the lead and be supported by the other, or vice versa, according to what the issue is. So that's what I think are the key opportunities. We have the opportunity to spend a lot of money, but we've got to make sure we spend it wisely. Defence is the easiest area to waste money, believe me, and end up with very little. Number two, we have this opportunity to have not just a European Germany in political terms, but a European Germany in defence terms. We have the opportunity to overcome the Brexit divide, at least in strategic and security terms. And finally, we have the opportunity for a NATO-EU relationship, which will be slightly more adult than the one that I've experienced in most of the years I've been living in this city.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for that excellent and very, very detailed overview. And many questions in my mind already as well, but I mean, before the questions, I mean, let's go to the final, but by no means the least speaker, General Pavel Machko. Please, sir, the floor is yours.
Once again, thank you very much for very kind invitation. And I have to say I'm not any more active military. Actually, I'm the leader of newly established political party in Slovakia, Civil Democrats of Slovakia, which hopefully sometime in the future will be member of EPP. But what I would call myself, I served 7 years in NATO headquarters, including being the commander of NATO Joint Force Training Center in Poland. And I would call myself nowadays a strategist analyst who tries to have a look and what the things are going on and what we can draw from that. Very first day when the Russian attack started, media have asked me what is my opinion on that war, on that attack, and my note was, well, what I see, this is not a shower or summer storm. This is going to be the dramatic climate change in security. And this is which I would start with. Simply, I would raise few questions and try to say my view on it and how we can look at it. And actually, I have to say, Jamie, you have stolen my 2 points, which is good, because then we can discuss this. No, this is actually, because we didn't coordinate at all. This talk. So we see dramatic change in security environment, because what has been just assumed that Russia might pose a threat, and which was discussed, including my country. Just recently we approved security strategy, and there were some opposition leaders who were fighting the idea that we have said just that Russia might pose a threat, or it's a risk factor. So now we see it is clearly the threat, and it's the imminent threat for all of us. It's existential threat. What we have seen, war has not started on 24th of February. It hasn't started even on 21st of February when Russia recognized those two breakaway regions of Ukraine, but it actually started many, many years ago. Even before annexation of Crimea and occupation of eastern part of Ukraine. We were subject of what we called hybrid war. And I would like to highlight that hybrid war really is a war. This is not something that is happening just in information domain and is just trying to influence the people and spread the message, influence our ability to make sound decisions in time when it comes to take decision. But actually, it's a hostile act against us, and hybrid war between us, the military guys, it really means the hostile activity. It's a war. It has a soft spectrum, but it has also hard spectrum. And what we can see now is those who are conducting against us the hybrid war. If the soft part fails and is not able to deliver the desired outcome, they are not hesitant to take the hard part of the spectrum, and we can see it now in the terms of destroyed Ukrainian cities. Simply, it's the most violent use of force you could imagine, just except the use of weapons of mass destruction. That's what we see right now. So the warning is that regardless how this conflict would end, unless Russia significantly would change, we are going to face different security environment for decades. So this is going to change our way of life and also the way how we have to think about our defense for generation. Simply, we cannot, if there is some arrangement, peace arrangement, we should not lift the sanctions. That's for first. Second, this will not be the victory of Russians as they dreamed. That's clear. But they will, most likely, they will recover with sober taste and with will for revenge, unless the regime in Russia completely changes. I can give you a very simple example. In 2014, during the farewell party of one of the defense attachés, there was a group of attachés, and Russian attaché came to me and told me, Pavel, we will withstand. I looked at him, and what do you want to withstand? No one is doing anything to you. It's you have annexed Crimea. You are fighting or stimulating appraisal in eastern Ukraine, and you are saying that you will withstand. So please understand, I'm not going to attack the Russian nation, but this is notion which is among Russian people. This is a notion among Russian elite. So if they walk away from this conflict, and they may achieve something, but it is definitely not what they wanted, and the price is higher than is worth of it. That's quite clear right now. But Russia will try to recover, will learn its lessons from failed military operations, because they still have the tools. I would disagree. They have tools, they have capacity, they have industry. They have no patience to do it right. They have lack of coordination. They missed a lot of other things. But the thing is, they will learn lessons from this war, not to make it happen again. And they will invest, if they will be able to find resources, they will invest in recovery in all terms. We were fortunate that they screwed up, actually, this operation, but this is not necessarily the future. In the future, unless we see any different Russia, we will face this threat. So that means it has strategic implications also for us. So what are the strategic implications for Europe? First, we will have to invest, and it has been already said, we will have to invest much more in defense, but for the generation, not now 1-2 years and then have happily dream. No, simply we will have to invest persistently, and we will have to change the way we look at defense. That means, for example, significantly a higher readiness would be required. Today, we have majority of our forces at the readiness level of 180 days plus. That means for some it's even 1 year. But look how fast the situation developed in Ukraine, and the crisis might arrive, and we will not be able to be bold enough to respond to it. The problem is that every day shorter readiness scheme costs billions if you look at the whole NATO. So it will be a lot of money, because it's a different level of training, different level of maintenance of the equipment, different level of stocks, prepositioning of the stocks potentially. So it's a lot of things. The other thing is, and I already touched it, prepositioning of stocks. At the moment, Russia is the biggest threat, at least in Europe. We don't know what will be the future, so we should not be so rigid. We will have to build agile, flexible, and adaptable force, which is able to change also its focus. But we will have this force unevenly distributed in Europe, so we have to think about how fast we can move it from one part of Europe to the other part, or across the ocean. Americans, they have fixed that they have prepositioning of its stocks in some nations. Now they are going to do it again, at least with some of the nations they are already discussing. We will have to invest into new capabilities, and just look what is going on. We have to analyze the conflict, regardless the failure of Russians in many areas. Simply, they were not able to generate what we call combined arms effect, but they have all the tools. So it's like you have orchestra with all the instruments. The only problem was there was no good director, and there were undisciplined players. So it's a cacophony what we see now. But if you know, in the near future they can make a sound music, well, in military terms out of it. So we will have to invest in new capabilities like drones of all of kinds, electronic warfare, cyber communication systems, more robust, but not based only on the space. Because what we can see, and now we can talk also about China and other players, they can take down, if they are so brutal that they are bombing the center of the cities, don't take it wrong. They will take down, if necessary, also the satellites. Simply, if we base all our communications on satellites, they will simply do it in case of contest. We would have to build robust air defense, particularly in our piece of world. Now we are very grateful for Germany and Netherlands, who are providing us on temporary base cover with Patriot batteries. But we haven't invested for air defense for years. And this is easier way to get to you beyond all these soft tools like cyber attacks and other things. We would have to have more armor in Europe. And like Germany has almost closed its tank battalions, tank brigades, there is no tank division in Germany anymore. We will have to have more armor because at the end, the brutal Russian tank, you will not stop by soft power. You need firepower to stop it. And that's the other point on my list. It's also modern anti-tank systems. You have to kill the beast, which is moving on the field, and you cannot stop it by hands. Simply, it's too heavy, it's too dangerous. A new array of sensors and dynamic targeting and joint fires means either we will have huge armies or we will do it smarter, more precisely, more effectively, but it requires substantial support. So we will have to invest in developing of new technologies which are for our defense. United States is already paying 3.4% of GDP for the defense. You may complain or argue that, okay, part of it is spent on their expeditionary operations out of area, which is true. But still, they are providing also nuclear deterrence, and they are providing substantial combat force, and not just air, but also on the ground. And obviously, they have power projection on sea. So this will probably last for Europe. We will have to base our defense on NATO, territorial defense on NATO. But we should not expect the United States that they will significantly increase their spending in order to fill the gap, which I just named in qualitative terms, but which was raised also by Mikuláš Dzurinda when he quoted the Americans that actually there will be much more needed in Europe, to be sitting in Europe, and there will be quest to have it from Europeans, that Europeans will have to deliver it. So there are two ways how to do it, and effectively, avoiding duplicities and being in national trenches and trying to fix it all on national level. Either we would go just by NATO defense planning process, and try to figure out the scenarios and try to figure out the forces needed for that, and then allocate it among the nations and find a way how to make it working together, which is actually effective for 70 plus years already. Or we would go to European solution, but not on the national basis, but more cooperative, more collaborative on the European level. And something has been already mentioned, commonly funded. So I would put here a crazy idea, thinking out of box. It has been named European Expeditionary Force. This is something which would fit still to the strategy compass, although I would question the strategy compass as a strategy. If I go by terms of ends, ways, and means, so by doctrinal approach to strategy, so it has great ends, it has less means and it has even less ways or the other way around. So it's not matching. The 5,000 expeditionary force is really still the battle group. I remember I was in charge of Czech and Slovak battle group, and formerly it was 1,500 number, but in reality it was close to 5,000, because if you add to all these enablers to make that force going somewhere. But this is suited for very small missions. It may work, but not necessarily to all the ends which are described in strategic compass. So it would be necessary to build much bigger, common, rather common than rotational, because it didn't work with battle groups, so it wouldn't work with bigger size either. So we would have to build European expeditionary force, and we can discuss it then later on. But I would suggest also the other portion. If we are talking about either follow-on force or contribution of Europe to its hard defense for high-intensity warfare, that means more heavy equipment, should we consider creation of something like, I call it European Strategic Reserve, which would be commonly funded? We might have European tank, we might have European fighter, and have this force built together from the common funding. We can discuss questions on how to fund it, because then you can either reinforce your weight if you use this expeditionary force and you need to do something more, or you can simply just give these troops, as nations do it, give it also as European Union to do collective defense by NATO. But the issue is, if we don't do it this way, we will have maybe 2 times more tanks than needed, but it will be not so efficient, and we might be missing some other parts of the whole puzzle. I'm sorry, I see that I'm probably too late. So there are just a few open questions, and I will stop there. So how to create this? How to employ it? That means what would be the rules? How to finance it? And in what scenarios? I would stop here, and then we have time.
Thank you so much, for that overview, and for also kind of raising these very interesting ideas, such as the European Strategic Reserve, which we can also discuss now. I would now like to ask if anybody in the audience has already burning questions, and I would suggest that. Do you have a microphone? So I'll take 3 questions. We'll combine them into one round, and then we'll take it from there. Please, here in the first row, second row.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for a very interesting presentation. I think that the silver lining of this dire situation is that the sleeping beauty, Europe, has waken up. Not only because they pay more now, but also for the newfound unity. But there is an elephant in the room. Unity is important, but it is important to see all the problems. How do we deal with a member state of NATO who is close both to the United States and NATO and Russia, and has bought S-400 from Russia and refuses to give them back? There is a problem with which we'll have to deal, and if we don't dare to see it now, there will be a day where we will be surprised.
Hi, thank you all for a fascinating talk. I have a more military question, if I can take advantage of the array of military expertise on this panel. And it's got to do with supporting Ukraine and what we do in the medium term. In the short term, it's quite clear that supplying more anti-tank weapons and anti-aircraft weapons is what's required. In the long term, it will be possible to support Ukraine with a fully modern NATO-compatible force, even if they're not in NATO, that would be integrated with broader Western supply chains and modern technology. but that might take some years. My question really is, what do we do after 2 or 3 months and before a full re-equipment of and modernization of the Ukrainian army is possible? What are the things that we can get to them in the medium term that they know how to use and that they have an industrial base, or we somewhere have an industrial base to support? Because the industrial base of the Warsaw Pact era equipment is obviously principally Russian, and that obviously isn't going to be available. So I'm wondering about this middle purpose, and if people could suggest what we might be able to do there.
Thanks. Here in the first row.
Hello. I would like to ask a question about financial aspects of...
Sorry, could you also introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Kinga Radowska. I'm from Russia, Europe. So we've seen that the EU has set an array of sanctions, implemented sanctions, but yet hasn't decided to cut off the crucial income for Russia, which is energy. And my question is maybe to Mr. Kubilius, do you see any prospects from the political perspective to build a pan-European consensus and to kind of change a paradigm in perception of German security to include also financial aspects of security into its modern warfare? And a question to Mr. Jamie Shee. You mentioned Germany has enormously, is planning to invest in new army. How much the new army will include modern warfare and emerging threats? And of course, it's too early to say, but what are how do you feel it's going to happen? It's very easy to invest in tanks, in equipment, but is there a space for the new German army to invest also in new emerging threats? And a question about political will in Europe and in Germany, and what is needed to actually make a breakthrough and implement sanctions on energy. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. It's already a good set of questions. And I would also kind of add to that set, to the general, a very specific question about, because you mentioned this possibility of European strategic reserve. Like, what would this kind of strategic reserve look like specifically? And would it be a European Union structure, or something outside the Union perhaps? And would it be a pool of forces that NATO could also draw on, or more something that could be used for crisis management? There was a very specific question to Mr. Kubilius, so I think we'll start from you. And I would just ask all of you to kind of be as brief as you can and address the questions as directly as possible. So please, sir.
Yeah, to Kinga, good to see you here. On what is needed to be done in order really to have political consensus, in Europe. We need to fight our political war, I'm always saying that this is, there's still some kind of mentality deficit on our side. We think that this is a war of Ukraine, a Russian war against Ukraine. And we are some kind of, somewhere in the neighborhood. We are, solidarity, we are showing solidarity and so on. But we still do not accept that this is our war. Our war. Putin is fighting against us, and this is our war. We are happy, we are lucky that, there is Ukrainians who are fighting, like heroes, But still, we are not taking that as our war. When I am saying our war, it means that, I am very simply saying we have 3 fronts, if to use this military, language. Sorry for, one is, of course, Ukraine. How can we support Ukraine and so on and so on, now in the war, and then, in geopolitical integration and so on. Second front is, Western capitals. This is our job, to do. And the third one, which is, that is, what we are discussing, it's, the fight for different Russia, which again depends very much on us. And that is why we, recently, last week, we inaugurated. That was one of my initiatives, and successful one, quite successful, I see. We initiated, a network, first of all, of parliamentarians all over the world, with a very nice title, United for Ukraine, and exactly, taking very clear goals, what we need to do, First of all, to help, Ukraine, then to fight the capitals. And this is 180, or 200 now, 200, members of different parliaments, 30 countries, EU member states, US, Canada, New Zealand, and even Greenland, I don't know what we shall do with Greenland, but it's good to have them, also inside. And we are starting, to do our job. For example, we looked, and again, a little bit, just 2 words on Europe, which was waking up, the first question was, I'm afraid that Europe, sometimes it happens that you are waking up, but then you are starting to look how to go back to the bed, You are happy that you are waking up, okay, we did something, good, and then, okay, let's go, we did our job. So, for example, on the support, what we learned from our, United for Ukraine group, one of the meetings, even on humanitarian aid. According to experts and international experts, McKinsey experts, since in Ukraine they have 10 million displaced persons, they need each day somewhere around of 15,000 tons of food. They are getting now, from EU member states, on a voluntary basis, 5,000. 10,000 are missing. And we are happy that we wake up, but we are not looking into reality. I am not so sure, maybe military people knows better, but I think that I hear, again, from all that our network, that on weapons delivery, again, we're tending to go to sleep, It's time for us. and there are shortages, even of that what we are delivering. So that's where we need to fight in the capitals, real fight, to create needed institutions. We need to understand that, this is, deep geopolitical crisis which Europe never faced. We have no institutional, knowledge about how to do it. Yesterday I was, offering to Commissioner Shinas to become war cabinet, chief in the commission, because I do not see who is taking really care about all the issues. We had him, in our conversation. So I said, you sound like the real general, You could take, some kind of this, approach, because I hope that, really, we shall succeed in this war. We shall come different, and really we shall become much stronger in geopolitical point of view. We shall have new institutions which are needed in that case. But some of those institutions we need to start to create now. Because if everything will stay on that kind of, voluntary basis, somebody is giving food, somebody is sleeping, or somebody is giving weapons, others are, a little bit sleeping, that will mean that we are not doing our job.
Thank you. Jamie.
Thank you very much. I'll take 2 of the questions, the one on Ukraine and the one on old-fashioned warfare versus 21st century warfare. On Ukraine, 3 things. I think in the short run, the first part of the answer to your very good question is keep up the current flow. And that's not easy because these weapons, javelins, stingers and so on, are used very, very quickly. One shot and that's it. The stocks are being depleted rapidly. Yesterday, for example, the United States announced that it was giving new contracts to American defense companies to replenish the supply of javelins and stingers. Obviously, there's been a massive financial donation. The European Peace Facility, €1 billion, 2 tranches. Yesterday, Biden announced another $500 million. But eventually, my sense is that we'll go to some Second World War style lend-lease system of giving the weapons to Ukraine on credit, on the expectation that they will reimburse at some later stage. I'm not sure to what extent the free deliveries will keep up indefinitely. The other question is going to be the obvious one. What do we keep back for us versus what do we give to Ukraine? In other words, we face a collective defense issue. We need weapons. So should we give all of our weapons to Ukraine? Yes, because Ukraine is the front line of our defense. They're fighting our war. But you remember, you're like me, you're a historian. You remember the Second World War where Churchill made himself very, very unpopular with France in 1940 because he kept the RAF back in the UK and decided not, in his view, to sacrifice it to prevent the defeat of France. Churchill would argue historically he was proven right because we had the RAF to fight the Battle of Britain. So there are going to be some difficult choices, but in the short term, keep the supply going. The medium term, this is going to be a tricky one because what is our strategy? Do we want to give the Ukrainians enough weaponry that they can fight the Russians to a stalemate, and on the basis of that stalemate, make peace with Russia still controlling a sizable chunk of Ukrainian territory, up to 1/3, potentially? The Russians have conquered 170,000 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory. That's the size of Tunisia. Or is our strategy to give the Ukrainians the weaponry to completely liberate their country? In that case, yes, artillery, multiple launch rocket systems, tanks, aircraft, switchblade, kamikaze drones, the full Monty, as it were, and setting up hospital systems in Europe to treat wounded Ukrainian soldiers to get them back to the fight. The UK, as you know, is also trying to sort of organise the weapons flow on a more agency basis, the conference taking place in London today. So what we give to the Ukrainians is going to depend on how long we want them to fight and how realistically we think it is to keep the Ukrainians fighting. We'll have that debate, believe me, before too long. The third issue, very briefly, Nicholas, is what happens later on, you asked this question, when Ukraine sort of emerges in its new shape. If it's neutral, is it neutrality which allows Ukraine to stay in the Partnership for Peace and continue to receive training and joint exercises, which NATO does with Sweden and Finland and many other neutral states? I think Russia is probably going to object to that. Or is it the kind of neutrality where Russia says, we mean by that not just no military bases in Ukraine, but no military partnerships whatsoever with any foreign country or organisation, which of course then would make supplying those weapons a contravention of the terms of the agreement. Your question is a brilliant one, and I think NATO and the EU have to think about it. Is the best answer to a Russian tank a NATO tank? We've seen with drones just how quickly the armour is destroyed and gets mangled. We've seen in Ukraine no war to lose, no big battle in one day when the fate of Europe is decided. Lots of small engagements with small tactical units which are survivable, which can hide, which can redeploy very quickly. So should NATO spend its money on creating a massive, dense army, easily attackable, or should it create more small mobile units? The other thing, because of course we could speak for many hours on this, it's such a fascinating topic, but what's the Russian way of warfare? And here I just want to link very briefly to what the General said. The Russian way of warfare so far is to basically keep you tied up doing non-military things. Attack nuclear power stations, create an environmental hazard, take apart the infrastructure, create a massive humanitarian crisis. Not simply 4 million Ukrainians going to Poland, but 4 million Poles fleeing into Germany. And these diversions, because Russia doesn't obey the laws of war and doesn't have any sort of red lines that it won't cross, could mean that NATO soldiers will be redeployed from warfighting, taking care of the consequences of Russia broadening the war into the environmental and to the humanitarian and infrastructure areas. That's why I believe that what the EU should do, and I didn't say this in my talk, is to create a kind of civilian military response force which can deal with the forest fires and the climate change and the counter-terrorism, the things that with the COVID-19, hospitals, deal with all of these kind of things, which we've been getting regular military forces to do in Europe over the last few years, but which I do not believe, given the new situation, regular military forces will be able to take on any longer.
Thank you, Jamie. General.
I would shortly stop at that question on Ukraine. Simply what we are giving them right now, it's what they can immediately use. If you give them new weapon system, it's beyond what, and I would sign up for what Jamie said, in terms of what we have on the stock and how can we replenish it. But in reality, you cannot give them new weapon system, which is complex at this moment, because they, instead of fighting, would have to withdraw soldiers and get their training, and the fight might be over before they get trained. So that's the short answer on why we are giving just what we are giving. Simply, they can use it immediately. It's easy to use. They are trained to it, and it's to be retrained within 1 or 2 days. Now, in the long run, I would agree what Jamie says. It will depend on what the arrangement and the terms of neutrality of Ukraine would be. But on the other hand, if Ukraine is going closer to European Union, I can see a huge space for cooperation of defense industry. Yes, they did produce the Soviet-style technology, but they still can play, like for air defense systems. We can have a European air defense system because they have a lot of capacity back in Ukraine in this version. If it goes to Western standards, if it starts to work as a company, which is they need funding and they need market, and if it plugs together with European design, with European funding, actually there might be joint venture which would work in this area. However, this will be based on what will be the outcome of the conflict, and actually what I fear is that Putin wants this to take for himself, Kharkiv and all that industrial base. He's not much interested in the steppe. He's trying to take this, and so far he's not that much bombing it, to be honest. In a moment I see that Russia is heavily destroying the industrial base. It's clear for me that they gave up the effort to take it, occupy it, and simply they will just destroy everything what is possible to be destroyed. So that's to the Ukraine. Now going to this European Union, I just said this is really about what kind of capabilities we need. We could have a good mixture of like a drone battalions, if I really tell it not military way, just to make it clear for everybody. Good sensors, eyes and ears on the targets. You need to have also tank, but not necessary for all Russian tanks to have match 1-to-1. Simply, these are the ways how to destroy it. Now, how we can do it? I look at PESCO. I look at the other things and what it does. It tries to subsidize, to support the defense research, development, and spending in some areas, but eventually, first, it's moving very slowly, and second, what are the capabilities which is supported? How does it complement or add to the real defense in terms of military planning? That means I have military plans, I have scenarios, and I have this fourth generation where I calculate what are the tools I need to fight that kind of scenario. And I don't see it that clear from PESCO, to be honest. So what I can imagine, and this is well beyond what has been discussed, but we have agreed commonly 2% of GDP for defense. We have agreed then about the percentage to 20% on investment on modernization. We have agreed on how much money would go to the R&D. My question would be, if the budgets are going anyway above 2% of GDP, and this is for you to discuss it in the political couloirs, but what if we agree that we would dedicate out of defense budget the common European defense budgets, simply create common European defense budget and start to build these capabilities, let's say European Union battalion of drones, which would be funded from common funds. But how to make these funds? Simply the defense budget would have allocation, let's say 0.1% of GDP, every nation of European Union member state would add to the common defense budget. And we would have it owned. But this is well beyond what has been discussed so far. But this is one of the things which we might start to discuss about, because you would then create the tool which you can use in all scenarios, it will be commonly funded, commonly owned. Obviously, a lot of questions: where it will be stationed, who will operate it, etc. These are the questions which you can balance. It's like in US, you have base, and you have other states. So they try to bring back federal money different ways. One state gets military base, the other one has the production line, if I say it this way. So there are ways how to arrange it. This will be very hard because we are hardly able to agree on other things. But this is something which I'm just looking if this threat continues, we will have to deal with these kind of questions. Otherwise, we will spend a lot of money individually as states. We will coordinate it. Obviously, we will have some rules, but it may not deliver all the things.
Thank you. I'll still take one more question. There.
Thank you very much for your interesting comments. My name is Nelly Kirillova. I'm a PhD candidate in International Relations and Security Studies in Hungary, here in Brussels, and I'm from Bulgaria. I'm studying the Black Sea regional competition versus cooperation for several years. I work on this less time than you, but I'll suggest some topics to discuss for the future. So, Mr. Kubilis, you spoke about authoritarian regimes, and Mr. Matsko, you spoke about strategies. My questions will be related to these two topics. The Russian military failed in Ukraine, but we should not forget that the people in Russia and Ukraine are connected by families. So maybe some soldiers have relatives there, and maybe this is the reason why their political will is limited. The EU lacks united positions sometimes because some countries are heavily dependent on energy security. These are Hungary and Bulgaria particularly, and their positions are questionable. And authoritarian regimes in the region include also Turkey. We should not forget its potential involvement in a different light. You spoke about the possible change of regime in Russia, but if Russia decomposes, for example, it becomes democracy and decomposes, would this pose threats for the EU from different countries maybe, or from different aspects? Is Russia the only threat that the EU is having? And then
I think that's probably enough. Sorry to kind of cut you short, but we're running short on time, so we have to do a lightning round. So
last.
We really don't have that much time, so I mean that's already several questions. So I'm terribly sorry, but we have to leave it there. So is that okay? You won't mind terribly,
very small.
Extremely quickly.
Yes. The UN is having youth peace and security and women peace and security. We're here speaking about military security only, but maybe there are other tools to change it. Maybe through convincing the people that they could have different wills in Russia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those questions. We're going to do a lightning round. I'm going to type 1 minute, and each of you kind of will give very short kind of 1 minute answers to whichever aspects of those questions, and we can do it in reverse order. So you, sir.
I would just simply say Europe doesn't have just Russia as a threat or as a competitor. So it is written in strategic compass. It is China. It's growing. We don't know where it will head. Simply, we are not going to change the regime in Russia. This must be natural on their side. We have to react on the regime as far as it stays as it is.
Thank you. Jamie.
Sorry, yeah, my tuppeny worth here with all of these very interesting but questions that we can't possibly do justice to in a minute. But on the women, peace and security, I mean, women and children, 1.7 million children have left Ukraine. If they don't go back, what does that mean for the capacity of Ukraine to regenerate as a society after the conflict? So women have fled, they're looking after children, they're impoverished, they're liable to be conscripted into trafficking. We've already had a rape case, there are probably more. So the whole idea of the protection of women, peace and security has to deal with refugees going out of the conflict zone elsewhere and how we protect them and sustain them, as well as what we do in Ukraine itself to protect women who are also suffering. indirectly and directly from the war. So you're absolutely right. I mean, that's a big issue. The second issue on the EU, in a alliance like NATO, a union of 27 like the EU, you're going to have differences. And you're going to have to recognize them and manage them. We have different levels of dependency. We can't do everything at once. That's fine, as long as the 27 commit to the long-term objective of reducing the dependency over time. Some can go faster than others. My country, the UK, we're not in the EU, but we don't import very much Russian oil. So obviously it's very easy for us to impose an arms embargo. On the other hand, dealing with Russian dirty money in London, that hurt. And it took us a long time to deal with that. So I think, politics is about managing these differences. We shouldn't be scandalized because they happen. But the key thing is the long-term strategy, which we all have to get behind, of over time reducing our dependency, diversifying. It's for our economic health as well as for our security.
Thank you, Jamie. Mr. Kubilius.
We are dependent on Norwegian oil and gas, but we are not, considering that as a very big threat. So the question is, on whom you depend.
It's true.
And the second point, really, I agree. First of all, for time being, Russia really is the greatest threat for European security. And what you were talking like military people, really, I agree with everything. We need to strengthen our deterrence capabilities, defense capabilities, whatever. 2.5, from GDP to budget of 3, it's definitely is needed. But I don't know why we are forgetting, in some way, some kind of political strategy. What can we do in order, this threat to, to disappear? Not in a physical way, Russia will not disappear, but in political way. We do not see the need to have a strategy how to help Russia to transform itself. So that is why I am really, signing Joe Biden recent, statement. This guy cannot, what he said, cannot stay in power. Okay, somebody is saying, well, we cannot intervene, we cannot, do, any kind of influences, it's internal. No, it's not internal. It's international threat. So I am not saying that we need to send, militaries into Russia and to, to find solution, but we need to see and to look really how to help Russia not to stay as a threat to all, Europe, to all the world. And there are plenty of possibilities, to speak with those people who are really looking for, change of regime, to how, Russia can be transformed. We need to send a message to Russian people that we believe that they can live in democracy. If Ukrainians are living in democracy, why Russians cannot live in democracy? And since, I really became very much, not believing in my prediction capabilities after 2 events. I was really not believing that the war can happen, can start. And second, I remember 2020, spring of 2020, when I was, despite all our, friendship with Belarusian opposition and so on, I was really, I confess, I was not able to predict that people of Belarus will start all that revolution against, Lukashenko. So when we're saying that Russian people, are supporting Putin and war in 70 or 80%, I don't, take that. I am not saying that, revolution can happen tomorrow or a day after tomorrow, but I will not be surprised if that will happen, despite the fact that for time being, we are not predicting that.
Thank you very much for all of those answers, and I think it's been a fascinating discussion. And when I was thinking about, the key issues, I came up with like 3 takeaways. The first is that an authoritarian Russia, as long as it remains an autocracy, will remain a threat to Europe and its neighbors, even though there might be a short-term solution to the Ukraine conflict. And this emphasizes the necessity of having some sort of political strategy at the European level, as you mentioned, Mr. Kubilius, as well. The second point is that NATO's role as in European security and defense cooperation will be reinforced by the war due to its responsibilities in the area of collective defense. And this will push Europe also to deepen defense cooperation in different fields, to invest more in defense, and also more probably increase cooperation between the European Union and NATO. And then finally, Europe needs to sustain a high level of defenses investment, like for years to come, like not just in the short term, but in the medium and long term, to make sure that like it acquires the new capabilities that it needs, not just to defend its own security and sovereignty, but also those of its partners. And here we shouldn't only kind of look at the conventional capabilities, such as main battle tanks, but also kind of more modern ones, cyber capabilities, drones. We talk about kind of a European like drone brigade, for example, as well, which would be an interesting idea. So just to conclude, thank you so much for all of the speakers. Thank you for everybody in the audience for coming, and thank you everybody who joined in through the virtual realm. Thanks, Jay.